Yo, Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, te Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. I hope everybody is doing well wherever and whichever part of the world they are in. Um, and nowadays we know there's only one topic which is top of the headlines in US as well as in Canada, and if not here, I'm sure pretty much or almost across the world today. That what is going on between India, Canada, US, and the Sikhs, and what is the issue? Why is India running death squads on? Running death squads. The Indian embassies, Indian diplomats have been accused of, running death squads on American soil and Canadian soil, and having committed certain murders as well, and acts of arson. And but there's a lot of lack of education on the issue uh, because there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation, unfortunately, floating around on the internet, especially propagated by certain governments. And but there's hardly any true objective discourse on what is the issue at hand. Why are all the media outlets today talking about India, trying to kill American citizens and Canadian citizens, and why are they even doing it? And so what I realized was, I being a recent immigrant, I having been born and brought up in Punjab, which is an occupied territory by India, have seen the Indian system, have come here since last 11 years now, an American. I have a unique view of, what is actually going on, and maybe a deeper understanding, hopefully, and maybe hopefully a truthful understanding of the situation. So I think the onus is on people like me, especially also other Sikh Americans, to talk about this issue, to spread, to bring more facts to the table. So my fellow patriots, whether they're American, Canadian, British, everybody impacted by this issue, they can gain general knowledge about what's going on. What is this about Sikhs? Why is India going after Sikhs in such a big way? I'm sure there are many hundreds of questions people have, depending upon how much background you already have of the situation, plus how many you might have been misinformed by the media. So with that, today, luckily I have a guest speaker with me today. And there are other people who speak. You are also welcome to take the speaker, but we'll primarily, our focus today will be to take advantage of Sardar Amandeep Singh. He teaches at the Berkeley University, I believe, and he's an anthropologist, a scholar, and American Sikh, with interest, obviously, in contemporary geopolitics and the issues that impact Americans in general, but Sikh Americans in particular. So we have, I think he's very active otherwise in the American Sikh political space. Luckily, he reached out to me today and kind of said, "Hey, do you want to talk about this issue?" And so that people come to know about it. And ਕਹਿੰਦੇ in Punjabi ਚ ਕਹਾਵਤ ਹੈ ਪਿਆਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਪਾਣੀ. I was very happy to take that offer and the opportunity. So without further ado, we'll probably kind of direct some questions to him. Then we'll open up it for larger discussion. So people who want the speaker, feel free to come up. Feel free to, we'll go through some questions. I have made a list of some preliminary questions, but it's a bit of an open forum. So people feel free to kind of jump in, ask counter questions, or rebut what Aman might have to say. So Sardar Amandeep Singh ji, welcome to the space. Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, the Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. Can you please also introduce yourself a bit? I might have done a very shoddy job of introducing you, but if you want to kind of start off, what brings you to the space? What kind of prompted you to get in touch with me, actually?
Hanji Bhai Sahib, Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Fateh.
You're too generous. I'm not, first of all, a teacher. I've taught as a graduate assistant. That's the highest ranks in academia I've reached. So I'm a student at best, only studying anthropology and philosophy over the last few years, and mostly just working in college communities and Sangat communities, Panthic communities, to look at the key, discourses that are shaping the discourses that run under the currents. Right? Mm. What is it that the assumptive logic that is the foundation of key discourses that we face? So that's been more or less an academic route. combined with some activity on the ground, but very much just interested in, as a serious student and activist, the community needs to face what's really going on at the level of intellectual commentary. Because until we engage with what's beneath the surface of, what there's the layer of the ontic on the top, and what's underneath that the undercurrents of the discourse are sometimes very different. And I feel like that's a big vulnerability that we've had in the past, where we sometimes get seduced into certain types of ways of thinking and ways of positioning ourselves that leads to vulnerabilities. But yes, I wanted to, I saw your work done yesterday, which was, I think, the first time I think anybody's done a slideshow of a concrete scale, bringing out the arguments. This is what's being done to us. This is what the popular narrative says about us. Where they acknowledge us, they acknowledge the government, you are the victims, and at the same time, there's this fetishistic sort of obsession with the project of India, with the greatness of the project of the nation state of India. So admit bhi kar raha nahin, naal hi deny kar dena. So I think those things you brought out really nicely. I think those type of things we need to highlight more. And I am just curious about how to develop this, for the English speaking audience, more than our own sort of Pontic echo chamber, which more or less is on the same page. But how to translate this, how to get this out in a crucial moment that doesn't come all the time, right? So we have a lot of spotlight, a lot of attention, but very little substantive narratives coming out. But Anji, those are some of the things that are forcing me to get back on these spaces, having these discussions. But I was inspired by the work that you did, and I hope we can further this with much more frequency.
No, no, absolutely. I think I'm with you on that. Uh, I'm a very recent entrant to social media. What brought me here, Amandeep, was I was working in the IT sector pretty much like you. I am from India. I saw in childhood the brutal repression, across the state, a genocide in front of my own eyes. But then, life gets along, you move along, and I was here, and then we see the way Indian government came after six in diaspora, and for a very minor thing, I would say, there was some Sikh gentleman, Mr. Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, who was conducting a referendum, just a referendum, which we don't even care about in free world. Like there are like hundreds and thousands of people. Just it's an opinion poll, if you ask me. And then the Indian government kind of made it a grave political issue with Canada, and started putting pressure on Canadian government that they have to kind of lock up anybody of Sikh diaspora, of Canadian or American descent, who of Punjabi descent Sikh in Canada or America, who is even talking about human rights in Punjab, or is talking about right to self determination of people in Punjab. And then the things did not stop there. Apparently, they now it's alleged, and there's some evidence and court cases. And now Canada is blaming officially India for actually having conducted an assassination of a Canadian. The U.S. government is having a couple of indictments where they have said that there are death squads on American soil being run by the very top of the political establishment in India. So that whole thing has blown up. But then India's reaction, has been very, very, dismissive of Canada, what Canadian Prime Minister has been saying. So how do you see all this that is going on? I kind of gave you a bit of my view, but can you touch upon this? What is going on related to this transnational repression, political spat or diplomatic spat that's going on between the two countries, or three countries now?
Yes, I think it's very interesting the way things have panned out. One, to just kind of underscore the irrationality of the entire situation. India has been caught with red-handed, uh, essentially in a very spectacular way. They have hired a FBI agent in US to outsource the hit on Sikh activists. They have left trails of concrete evidence in Canada linking their embassies and consulates that worked as control centers, linking those directly with those responsible for arson, for extortions, for murder threats, and of course, Tupai Nijjar's murder itself. So, just for those who are not familiar with the fascist regime known as India, uh, this is the status quo of how India deals with dissent. It has deluded itself into thinking that it is a superpower because it has a large population of consumers, and it has started operating the way it operates within its own boundaries, outside of these boundaries. So it hired agents, it hired criminals, it manufactured crimes to make it look like there's gang violence in Canada. It hired multiple agents with multiple hits, sponsoring multiple hits within US. The estimates are 2 to 3 per month, and there's chilling detail in both the indictments that show that there is a direct that there's no shortage of funds, and that they are open to killing Sikhs and hunting Sikhs down. And the key disagreement between Canada and India is that India is essentially saying, why doesn't Canada help us? Why doesn't Canada silence and hunt and execute Sikhs the way we do in our borders? That's essentially what the argument boils down to. But at the high level, this is very abnormal to see in international relations. This looks like something out of a sci-fi or a Bollywood movie, where there is this sort of super sloppy strategy and super sloppy tactical engagement. So they strategically misunderstood the situation, and they thought that they could do what they do in India in Western societies. And tactically, it's a fiasco. They hired FBI agents to place the hits.
Got it. On this, like India's, we recently, just to kind of lay out the evidence, right? So the Canadian, we had Trudeau stand up in Parliament last year, say that they have intelligence of India being behind these killings. Then we had RCMP arrest 3 Indian nationals in Canada who were involved in the actual assassin, who were actually assassinated the Canadian Sikh activist. And then we had some indictments filed in US court, kind of linking to the same conspiracy. And then we had a very spectacular event of RCMP commissioner last week, kind of doing a press conference and saying, "Hey, it is not just the one killing. The Indian diplomats are basically running a crime syndicate, and they are involved in multiple homicides, arson, attacks, extortions, as well as interfering in the political system." So there are 4 different elements he laid out, and he basically said, "I'm doing this in desperation because I want to disrupt the this kind of operation by the diplomats, the Indian diplomats." But then India's reaction, taking it at face value, has been, and it has been bought by many of the, unfortunately, in our media itself in Canada, they are also kind of, regurgitating the Indian kind of statements on this, that maybe this is political. And maybe Trudeau is doing, this from a political angle to get Sikh votes. What do you have to say about that?
Right. So we are to believe, according to the Indian news and Indian state media, state narrative, that a nation like Canada, that has heavy reliance on business with India, that has democratic alliance with India, and whose PM is facing turmoil internally within the left, and obviously through the opposition on the right. So he would stick his neck out without evidence, without any concrete information, and repeatedly on national TV, on the parliament floor, go out and challenge India and accuse India. So that's the basic logic on the other end. That's what's going on. So if we were to believe that, then what sort of a political rationality is behind such sort of moves. It would be suicidal for any politician to come out and be this bold and this repetitive and this frequent in accusing a close ally, and not to mention the corporate interests that are being disrupted. On the other hand, you have the multiple sort of cacophony of narratives coming out of India. The political elite, everyone all the way up to the BJP cabinet and the prime minister and the home minister, have said in the parliament floor of India on its inauguration day that the BJP India is the India that goes into the homes of our dissidents in other countries, in on other shores and other lands, and assassinates them and gets them in their own homes. So that's the narrative that they're using and that they're justifying to their own home base. So are we to believe that narrative, or should we believe the narrative that the diplomats are putting out, that India is a democratic nation state and it would never engage in any sort of violence? So there's a disconnect within their own narratives. They're both denying it and celebrating it at the same time. So this is obviously, for those who assume India to be a democratic ally, this is a shock. For those of us, who have seen the other side of Indian nation state, which is essentially a police regime, we've seen it only in this light, right? As a
Yeah.
violent, fascist regime that will silence you at any cost.
Why? And there's another thing I have noticed, Amadip, like that you're right. Like I kind of agree with you on that personally, and I would like to add, like, it's beyond me. Even if Trudeau is doing it politically, like I won't believe, even for a cent that our CMP commissioner is, coming out and doing it for Trudeau's political career,
Right.
and then like and for context, and we'll talk about it later, like people kind of see India as a normal state while it is not. So we'll talk about that. But why is there's a difference in the way India is treating Canada. Like India is very
Right.
dismissive of Canada. India is saying we are going to the Indian national media is basically going full, like, I don't know what is the right word. They every day they are basically one diplomat or Indian or one politician kind of threatens that they're going to nuke Ottawa or nuke Canada until Trudeau, and then they have like other kind of things that they will take Trudeau out of power and they'll make conservative come in power. But then the US is also making the same allegation. In reality, if I have to compare the both, the actions of US are way more strict because US have actually filed two indictments and they have named government of India employees, and they have even extradited one Indian, and then they have named a serving intelligence officer in raw, and they are demanding that guy to be handed over. But the Indian reaction, diplomatic reaction to US has been very muted. They're saying, "Oh yeah, yeah, we listen to you," but very different to Canada. Why is that so, in your view?
I mean, basically, I don't think you can't bully the superpower, right? You can have a he said, she said row between Canada and India. India can go ahead and do that. It can do that with the superpower. So American power, American political weight doesn't allow that to happen. The other side of it is that at the same time, if we flip the roles and if we think about how India is being treated compared to other states, rogue nation states, North Korea, Russia, China, Iran. I mean, had Iran gone into an American synagogue and assassinated a rabbi that was a dissident, we would be having calls for regime change on the congressional floor right now. There would be an uproar in the media. There would be indictments landing all the way up to the president, right? The entire chain would be implicated. That's not happening. Right? So there is a sort of kid's glove, gentle handling of India by US. And this we know from the timeline of the indictments as well. So while Modi was here, the red carpet was being rolled out to him. There was the highest congressional honors, which is allowing someone to speak in both the houses was given to him. There was a massive amount of enthusiasm by the State Department, by the government, to host it, while they knew that Nijar was assassinated by the government of India. So we have to put the big picture at the center, which is that the nation state of India is a handy tool for Western corporate interests and for Western Asian Pacific policy, as well as for various sectors of economy within the U.S., especially tech, which is heavily infiltrated and heavily, I would say, they have a hegemonic hold in the sector, the Hindu supremacists. So all of that is at play, and they are not doing what they should be doing, which is giving indictments and dragging them down to U.S. They have one person, which is more or less a foot soldier. They have another person that they've accused, which is Vikesh Yadav in India, but he's also a foot soldier. So it's very reminiscent of Saudi Arabia. There is like some gesture of complaint initially, but then things go back to business. And that's the fear, right? That's what we should be calling out, that whether the US decides to treat us like subhumans or not is the question. Whether they decide to include us in the community of humans, of modern political subjects who have rights over their political autonomy or not, that's the question. And it's on the West, right? India doesn't. And
Yeah.
whether the West wants to make this into a playground for authoritarian regimes to come in and do what their violence and they'll turn to the other side because there's a 1.5 billion consumers on the line. That's the key question I think we should be focusing on.
No, that's a very good point you bring up, Amandeep. And it kind of baffles me when I look at things objectively. I saw it firsthand. Like people don't know, just for the sake. In India, every police station has a torture cell. Just imagine a country of 1.5 billion people. Every police station has an authorized torture cell. When you get recruited as a policeman in India, the first thing you are taught as part of your training is how to do human torture. And that is like, and it is state sanctioned, their SOPs. And most of the torture is directed, I think the amount of torture that got directed against Sikhs is kind of, like it'll put North Korea or like Idi Amin to shame. These are not my words, these are the words of some of the intelligence officials of India itself, and they have written books on it. We know, if you look at all the United Nations Human Rights Commission records, India is the highest violator of human rights across any country. It does not. It's way above even North Korea and countries like Africa. You look at any index which looks at human freedom, whether it is a press index or human freedom index, India ranks at the bottom. Like it's generally out of 180 countries, it'll be at 161, 167, etc. Uh, in that environment, the six we know got persecuted multiple times. 35,000 were murdered on the streets of different cities in 1984. There was a kind of a 2 decade kind of a jungle rule where the rule of law was suspended and the Indian state picked up, tortured and murdered any Sikh who was even remotely religious. And then there are other issues of how the Indian state treats the state of Punjab, which is a Sikh majority state. Given that the case, Sikhs are, anybody who will look at the data will say Sikhs are the good guys. Hey, in face of this repression, they are, fighting this big government. And Sikhs never, in return, basically persecuted the own Hindu minority which was living alongside them, and in a big way. And they and so anybody will say that this is a righteous fight, that Sikhs are fighting a battle for justice, equality, rule of law, basic right to self-determination, human dignity. But what you see is actually very opposite. um, I know the reason. I don't want to lay the reason, but I want to pick your brain. What we see is that whenever Sikhs talk about freedom, justice, fight against a big government, and they kind of call the independent state of Punjab as Khalistan. Some people just call it Free Punjab or Occupied Punjab. Like the whole Khalistan has been linked with criminality, um, and people are being kind of asked question. Are you a Khalistani, as if it equals to being a terrorist? I have not seen
Right.
that happen, like with any other freedom movement, like whether it was, Scottish separatists or Quebec separatists, or like you
Right.
don't see that. But why does it happen only with Sikh freedom activists? Like, why are they labeled? Why is Khalistan being equated with criminality in such a way when the reality is so opposite?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the sort of assumptive logic that needs to be called out. Almost every news channel, no matter how sympathetic they are, their bottom line argument is, I've heard questions from sympathetic news journalists, uh, but was Niger involved in stoking separatism in India? But was he a Khalistani? And this is as absurd as asking a Palestinian, people say that you're a Palestinian, is that true? Or asking a Scot, they're accusing you of being Scottish. Is that the case? Right? So that's the level of the repetition that the Indian state and the other side has done on this narrative. That just the word in itself is a priori criminal. And that needs to be called out. Stepping back from the questions, we need to go back and say, Khalistan is the insane idea that Sikhs are human beings, that they are modern, they're part of a modern political community of subjects who have political autonomy, right? That's the insane idea that we're pushing. And that's the literal essence of the antagonism that Sikhs have with the Indian state. That, and this is not a political problem, honestly, because we're dealing with a regime of violence that is more mature, more profound, more accomplished than any other racial structure of violence the world has ever seen. Just to go off on a quick tangent, the state of India is an instrument for Brahmanical power. Brahmanical power is essentially what is it really? It is a way of dividing humanity, one, creating a hierarchy of the humans, and creating a clear apartheid between the human and the subhuman. So not only are they creating upper and lower castes, they're creating a category of sentient beings that are not considered human. Those are Chandals, those are Ashoots, untouchables, those are Malays, those are non-Hindu others, including Buddhists, including Jains in history, including Muslims today, and including most of the Sikhs that they consider somewhere between Shudra and Chandal. So we're not fighting a political conflict. We're fighting we're engaged in an antagonism. And the difference between conflicts and antagonisms is that antagonisms cannot be resolved. We are a problem for the Indian state because we exist and we resist and we uproot the entire caste system from its roots. And the only place I would argue that there has been a subversion of the Brahmanical power, Brahmanical caste system in history is Punjab. And it's happened through Sikhi. Those who labored with their hands, those who were called Chandals, those whose shadows were considered too impure, and those who were considered too impure to belong to the caste system. Basically, people who work with their hands and feet, so Shudras and Chandals, they are the ones that have the highest social currency in Punjab for the last 400 years. They're the ones that call the shots, right, in terms of politics, economics. And those who are considered upper caste are actually at the bottom of the ladder as far as social currency goes. So that subversion is a product of Sikh history, Sikh presence, and that's the root of the antagonism that we have with the state. So the state is not looking to punish you for your transgressions, it's looking to eliminate you and absorb you.
Yeah.
The only way to do that is to silence you absolutely everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, I think you are hitting on it. Like, for example, somebody just picked up, like, there are the millions asking for a separate Tamil Nadu country. the Karnataka people ask many times, but they never get labeled as criminal, terrorist, or persecuted in India in a large way, the way the Sikhs are. And I think you are onto it. I totally agree with you, Amandeep. At the core of this, at the base of this, is the fight against the caste system. And people will sometimes say, why is it so? That is the real undercurrent. Okay. And let me kind of, you put it out eloquently. I want to kind of add, kind of say it in a different fashion. People need to understand, people don't understand the Indian state, which is a Gandhian state. If you have to understand India, just go and read Gandhi. Gandhi was the biggest proponent of the caste system. People don't know it, and we have done multiple spaces wherein his fight was never against the British. He always, in his writings in vernacular languages of India, always clearly laid out that his fight was to get the pristine Varnashram, the caste system, resurrected in India after the British left. And that way you can have these divisions. And the fact is that Sikh religion being a native, and it's easier for the casteist Hindu elite to reject Islam or Christianity because they are outside religion. But you have Sikhi, which is born in India, which is an antidote to casteism. Now you cannot let that philosophy survive. You have to assimilate it. And it is that core fight which is kind of playing out in different ways. And people, so it's a, at the end of the day, it is a fight of values. If you are a Sikh,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, add if you want to add. But yeah, I'll just land
I
it.
just
Yeah. If you are an Indian, the core value of describing yourself as an Indian is you have to swear by the unity and integrity of India at any cost. And that is why in India you see mass murderers, people who have done genocide, mass rapes of even kids. They get rewarded by the state and the society if they did it to kill a separatist or to silence a dissident. But in Sikhi, as a Sikh, you have to always value human life. You have to look at everybody as equal. You have to stand by values of hard work, equality, fight against tyranny. And if you are a Sikh, you cannot ascribe to this concept of swearing by unity and integrity of India at any cost. It's totally antithetical to Sikhi. So there is this war between these two value systems. The Sikhs are saying we are going to never call ourselves Indian or Hindu, but the Hindu or the Indian state is saying the real fight is they want all the Sikhs to declare themselves as Hindu or Indian. The day the Sikhs do that, the Indian state has no issue with Sikhs. They're very happy to keep them. If you want to just touch upon a bit on that, yeah, just want to add more color to that dimension because people don't understand this complex, undercurrent that's going on.
yeah, I would go even further. That it's not just that they want your confession that you are part of. They want to materially annihilate your difference. So this is not just a confessional, sort of a Judeo-Christian style understanding of faith, where I profess to be a Christian. Now we're all good. What you would assume that most of Europe did this in its history, right? It also did ethnic cleansing based on religion. It basically left nobody other than Christians around. So we're not glorifying one side or the other, but I think what's worse, and why is Brahmanism the most radical, most profound form of violence as a regime of violence that the world has ever seen? Because it is way more vicious. It is not looking for just a confessional statement. It's looking for your annihilation. And why is that the case? They are not. I mean, there's a paradox, right? At the heart of it, they say everything is Sanatan, everything is Indic, everything is part of us. So that means there are no boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Everything and anything that's existed in the world is more or less a extension of a Sanatan philosophy. So they hollow out, they empty their container of what is their tradition, right? So it's a hollow container. So what makes it very flexible is they say South Asian Muslims are part of Hinduism, Sikhs are part of Hinduism, Buddhists are part of Hinduism, Jains are Hinduists. All different philosophies under the umbrella Hinduism are obviously Hindu, no matter if they're not, they're Charvaks or logicians that don't consider God to be a real reality. So everything is already always Indic. So they have this flexibility built into their concept because it's a fake concept. It's a modern construction. There's no such thing as, obviously, as we know, the etymology of the word Hindu doesn't go back to any Hindu text, any Hindu scripture, any Hindu even commentary on Hindu scriptures, the Smritis. It goes to modern construction of self-identity based on the other. So in response to Muslims, there was the concept of Hindustan and the Hindu being the inhabitant of this land past the Indus River. But the point I was making is that they're not happy with you confessing. They genuinely want your eradication the way they eradicated Buddhism from this region. Buddhist state, the Maurya state had upwards of 85,000 shrines and temples. Some of them were 30 feet high back at the beginning of this millennium. They were all eradicated within one generation. Buddhism came up with the critique of hierarchy, of caste system, through the idea of praxis, that it is your that's what's important. So the focus on practice. They used that, and they incorporated it, the Brahmins did, by making it part of the multiple life cycles. So it is because of your karma that you did in the last cycle that you are born a Shudra or a Shudra today. So they incorporated the difference without letting it disrupt the power structure. So Brahmins are still at top. They incorporated the idea of reincarnation that came from Jain tradition into their own without letting it disrupt the power structure. So they are not happy with just allowing you to be reconciliatory, to be on their side. They want to physically eradicate all difference. The entire project, and this is not just some philosophical, historical, religious interpretation. The spokesman for BJP in 2016 went on BBC and declared that we have no problem. The host asked, what's your problem with Muslims? He said, we have no problem with Muslims. We have no problem with Pakistan and others. We just want them to own up to their truth, which is that they are Hindu. They're part of the Akhand Bharat Aryavrata. That is actually the entirety of Asia. It extends from Mecca. The original idols that were there before Islam were Hindu idols. Ram and Ibrahim are the same. So there's this syncretist drive to incorporate everything. And Akhand Bharat is an actual political topic and agenda for BJP that should extend from Mecca to Indonesia. And the key role of this, the key function, the drive of this project is the annihilation of difference within this territory to create one language, one tradition, one type of followers, no matter how reconciliatory they are with you. So this is not, some abstract, lofty critique. This is their party agenda. This is what they talk about when they go on BJP.
Yeah, I want to kind of put it like, I think you put it like, there's a very deep concept you just explained. Not very deep, but like in this sense, this is the underlying concept that's there. People don't know, and you kind of brought it up to the fore. What Aman was saying was, today the state, the Indian state or the Hindu state, calls its religion not Hinduism. They have started calling it Sanatan Dharma, which means the oldest religion. So once you declare yourself the oldest, everything else basically becomes your branch. Okay, so now their claim has extended to that Islam is also coming out of us, Christianity also came out of us, Judaism also came out of us. So I mean, there's a very interesting phenomena. If you actually go back to the time of Karamchand Gandhi, and the Hindu or fascist kind of teachers or his contemporaries, RSS, at that time when British were in power, the main stand that all the the Hindu nationalists or Indian nationalists used to take was that we are Aryans, that we are also white Aryans, that Hinduism was basically this Aryan dharma, and it became along with it, we are your brothers, so we should jointly suppress these Dalits and Shudras of the subcontinent. That was their official narrative. You can read Karamchand Gandhi, and I'll quote him. I made a presentation where I have some of his quotes, okay? And I'm going to read it as we go through it. And now, the moment the British kind of left the subcontinent and this casteist elite has the power in India, they have flipped the narrative now. And they have kind of gained some semblance of economic and military might across the world. Now, the narrative they have flipped is no, 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 no. We are not coming out of you. You are coming out of us. We are the oldest. Even you guys are illiterate, not knowledgeable enough. And
We're your older Aryan brothers.
we are your pre-Aryan brothers, even, so, or fathers, basically, not even brothers. So they've kind of flipped the narrative. It seems that it's this tendency to change the story to suit their political aim. Kind of makes this whole ideology very dangerous, don't you think so? They can basically flip the story whichever way they want to, depending upon the power dynamics.
Yeah, and they've kept it flexible so that it doesn't need a definition. So there's no content to the category. You ask any of the scholars of religion, what is Indic? When you say India, the category, it's a category that has no content, no coherence. What is India? It is our religion. What is your religion? It is India. It's a circular logic where there's no real content. If you ask any scholar of India, what do you mean by the Indic? What does that contain? What are the boundaries of the Indic? There's no answer. Everything is always already Indic, and in a way, there's nothing Indic. And I think this is helpful, but it's also a cause of anxiety because they don't have a ground to stand on. They are actually, there's a lot of anxiety if you look at the way they react. And this is a deeper conversation that needs to be had at the level of psychoanalysis. Basically, that there is a physical, visceral reaction that the Hindu community, the civil society, and the state has when it is challenged at its foundations, like it is by Sikhs or by some Dalits or by others. They become violent in a brutal, irrational way. So if you notice during the farmers' protests, they're very secular asks, they're very simple concerns, economic rights, and majority of the farmers are actually that would benefit from it would have been Indian, non-Sikhs. But the level of vitriolic vile that was spilled on this platform, Twitter itself, people that were appointed members of parliament, calling Sikhs cancer, calling Sikhs the virus within, the vermin that need to be exterminated, right? And then there was calls of genocide, right? There were literal calls of genocide. There were people here with blue ticks citing people like KPS Gale saying, he was right. We should have gone after their families. Let's go after their families. And lo and behold, and this is the power of the fantasy of the master of the majority community. Their fantasies have real power. So they come up with this on Twitter, and lo and behold, the next few days, there's actual raids at people's houses, and their families are picked up, and they're tortured. So there is a ritualistic drive to degrade, dishonor, and conduct violence on the other, on the non-Hindu other and the lower caste other. That's how community formation happens for them. If you look at the inception of India since 47 until now, it's a history that's a history of the Hindu army's assault and violence against non-Hindu others. Carpet bombing of Kashmir in 46 and 48, carpet bombing of Hyderabad and Mizoram and northeastern states right after, the slow genocide, of Sikhs and Dalits. In the meantime, spectacular violence of 84, right? So, the sari history is basically the way the self and the country comes into understanding itself, the way they build their own identity of their self, is by differentiating themselves and degrading the other. And there's a lot more to this, that'll take much longer, but, this is not a political problem.
Yeah. No, this is Yeah, this is a deep psychological side to it. I mean, like I am a student of history, and as I said, I took a sabbatical and started reading the history, especially after the advent of British. There is this very unique event which happened in 1857, where the Hindu upper caste Hindu soldiers and the Muslim soldiers mutinied against their British officers of the Indian Army, and that is kind of is painted in India as a first freedom struggle. But the reality, if you actually read the events, it was a very bastardly event, because British at that point were one of the other multiple powers within the subcontinent, and they were the more benign power, because they would even hire lower caste people, give them equal pay, and at least treat them with some dignity. But when these upper caste soldiers revolted, uh, there are like instances wherein it's one thing, you revolt against somebody who's controlling you, but who've been enough fair, like have not been that bad, but like they will not be only be happy with just murdering the British officers. They will take their women. There was an incident in Kanpur where 100 British women were kind of raped and mass by 100,000 people. The kids were butchered to death. Same thing happened in Delhi, wherein any white woman they will find, they will just become animals, like, because that woman has no like play in that game. She's just there with the kid, and a small kid had no. But the hate that came out in 1857 is what made, when the Sikhs actually supported the British and saved them in that point in time from just total annihilation in the subcontinent. The same thing we saw in in all the genocides that get conducted after British left in India. It's always the state supporting the majority community in going ahead and mass murdering the minorities, like in 84 against the Sikhs, or in 2002 against Muslims. There are many other such things that have happened, but every time, just the sheer, I can understand if you're attacking the male members, but the sheer brutality they show against women and kids of the opposing community, even when you are the more powerful entity, like there's nothing like you have absolute power, like that sheer brutality against women and kids of the opposing community, where is that coming from?
I think that's a very productive question because there's political conflicts, ethnic conflicts all over the world. There are genocides all over the world. But what you see in the case of Brahmanical power of India is that there's a ritualistic enjoyment and a celebration involved with the violence. So this is the case in November '84. When they're not trying to eliminate the other, right? This is the difference between genocides or political conflicts or ethnic conflicts and a conflict that's really an antagonism that's coming from a much deeper place, a much more mature regime of violence that the world has ever seen. I mean, frankly, they're the first community in the history of the world to coin the concept of racial purity. That has to be registered by the world. They haven't, the global civil society hasn't properly taken account of what is really at the heart of this violence, which is how vast it is, how mature it is, how accomplished it is. So when you look at the history of violence against the non-Hindu other in the subcontinent of India, you see one thing that's very straightforward and in your face, which is that there is a spectacular, brutal violence. They're not just shooting people, they're not getting rid of the other, they are rejoicing and community building and cultivating an enjoyment out of the torture and the dishonor of the other. So why attack Darbar Sahib? Why attack only the most sacred things that you hold in your psyche? Your spaces, your sacred places, 78 Gurdwara in the course of 1 week, looking for one man. They attack your most sacred, more dignified relations in life. So, your family, your mothers, your sisters. They attack everything that you hold sacred. And the purpose is not to eliminate you, the purpose is to dishonor. There's no economic utility to do this sort of disruptive, humiliating violence to a community that's the backbone of your GDP at independence. There's no developmentalist logic. There's no rationality. There's no utility to reduce your own GDP to conduct this type of violence against a community that's so entrepreneurial and such a huge part of your GDP. There's no economic utility to humiliating the Dalit. In Tamil Nadu, at the beginning of the century, way before Indian state came into power, there was a group of Brahmins who came up with who aligned themselves with the local king, and they came up with the breast tax. The breast tax was simply a prohibition of Dalit untouchable women to cover upper parts of their bodies. And this has nothing to do with economics. This is about sheer humiliation and dishonor of the other. Because upon this dishonor, you can build a self, you can build a psyche, a subjectivity. So when they attack Sikhs in mass, in groups, in Delhi, and every other city in November 1984, they're not looking to kill them off. They're looking to watch them dance, as they used to say, right? And the entire community would get around, from the youngest to the eldest, and they would, it's a very common phenomenon when you have this sort of a psychological uh, relationship with the other, where you want to dishonor them. In the US, you had similar situations where you would have sort of this picnic, around lynchings of blacks. This is 50, 60 years ago, not too long. There would be a communal enjoyment event, right, where people would take postcards and take pictures and sign them and send them to each other and have sandwiches on a lawn. So this happens when you have a community whose self-identity and self-understanding is built on the dishonoring and the degrading of the other. And this is the core feature of Brahmanism. It's not political or economic exploitation. The Marxist logic doesn't work here, right? What utility is there to bring your own GDP down? ਆਪਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਾ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਕੀਤਾ, ਰਾਈਟ? ਆਪਦਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਕਰਾ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੰਨੀ ਲੰਮੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜੀ, right? 2.5 decades. They're still, so there's a lot more to this, ritualistic side of this violence.
Yeah.
This is what we need to bring out at the level of global civil society. That you keep thinking of this as a human, as some sort of a violation of a protocol, some international relation protocol problem or some political problem. This is much, much deeper, and the world needs to register it like they register anti-blackness, like they register anti-Semitism, like they register Islamophobia, right? This is one of those categories. This is the most mature and the most accomplished one.
That's correct.
Sorry, I took a long time.
No. I mean, like you kind of really light bulbs are going on in my mind. You kind of made me see a lot of things and made a lot of things make sense to me, because I was able to kind of find logic of why they persecute the Sikhs, but I was never able to understand like why this genocidal impulse. Like somebody has used this term that Harjeet, these guys have genocidal impulse. I'm like why, man? Like why would, okay, you can kill the British male, you can get your control, but why to kind of mass degrade the white woman and the kids? Same thing that they did with the Sikh woman. Like there are instances after instances that, like, there's somebody the police wants to catch, the Indian police wants to catch a Sikh militant, they will go and capture the entire family, and then they will rape the daughter in front of the father, or make the father-in-law like daughter like naked on the body of the father. All kind of like Sikh sadistic stuff, that you are kind of struggle to justify, like why would they do that? And I think you are on something when you say that they define themselves by in the degradation and dehumanity of the other, because in themselves there is nothing. And that's typical, because the moment you ask somebody, tell me what is Hinduism, immediately he will start quoting other scriptures. Like he'll start quoting the Sikh scriptures, the Islamic scriptures, or the Christianity, rather than quoting what he himself is. Like, what are you? Tell me what you are. But then they say, oh, we have no definition. It's always in relation to others, and kind of at the end then say, okay, all of you are from us because you basically copied us. Like, it's kind of a very sick mentality. And it's a very, I think it's a this whole problem is a very anthropological problem. I don't want to kind of make it sound benign by saying it's an anthropological issue, because it is a dangerous issue, but it's a very deep issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add a quick color to this a little bit. If you, I mean, we can put this into circulation in any, any conversation we're having with journalists or others, is to say, look at the precedent. When was the last time a political unit named India existed over the subcontinent? When is the last time uh, a nation state existed in this region? Before the British, right, which you can call the greatest, catastrophe of the modern era is European imperialism. Before that catastrophe, there was no semblance of a nation. The idea of a nation state, first of all, is a concept, it's combining two concepts, a nation and a state. And its origin lies in European modernity. This whole is a very peculiar concept, right? It doesn't exist anywhere else. So, every Indian scholar and every Indian diplomat and every Indian commentator thinks India exists for the last 6,000 years, and it's eternal. And there's this blurred boundary between mythology and political science and Bollywood fantasies about themselves. But there's literally no single administrative unit that existed here that spanned the entire subcontinent, because it's such an unnatural entity. Why? It's the equivalent of all of Africa being one nation. It's the equivalent of all of Europe being, well, even worse, because Europe is more or less all
Yeah.
one religion,
Yeah.
more or less all coming from one linguistic family,
Yeah.
more or less all ethnically connected. Here's the fact: of the 19,000 languages that have come on this earth in the history, over 9,000 of them came from South Asian subcontinent. Before the British, there was tremendous diversity. There were languages, there were cultures, there were dialects, there were governing bodies that existed. There were 550 principalities and states. All of those were consolidated, imprisoned in the form of a unitary centralized nation state for the purpose of capitalist extraction for the British Empire. And that's how they ended up with a state.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's never been an Indian state.
I want to give like
It's not registered.
yeah, I want to give like British. You're right. You're right. That's a cardinal sin of British, but I want to give them a bit of a benefit of doubt, because I was reading these. What were the British thinking about India, like the political future of India? So, just to share with you, not to kind of debate it, but just what I learned. So, I started reading all the British records, especially, every 10 years, they will do two things. First, they will do census of India, and then they will do political reforms. In 1909, we had Parliamentary reforms, which basically meant they will start giving more power to the provincial assemblies and reduce the powers of viceroy's executive council. So elected representatives have more power. And so, 1919, we had Montagu Chelmsford reform. 1929, you have Simon Commission, and so on. And then, and if you read the Census of India books, like they've come in multiple volumes, and I think they did a great job of preserving, like they will note down every single language, ethnicity, and all that. After they left, all that transparency in government, basically documentation, vanished. But when you read those British records, it is very evident that in their political vision for the subcontinent, they had already declared in 1909 that they plan to leave eventually. But the idea was to have a United States of India, wherein you have these provinces or independent countries with their separate constitutions, with a common defense, which is basically what I call a multinational state, which is not a nation state, because now you have multiple nations as part of a state, but each nation is sovereign in itself. US is pretty much a multinational, multicultural state. Maybe not a multinational, but multicultural state. Um, European nations are not. European nations are nation states. Like Spain, you have one nation, one state. And uh, I would give it a, like, from my understanding, like the idea they had, even the last ditch effort they made, which we call the cabinet mission plan, they were basically proposing that each state will be sovereign with its own constitution and with a common defense and limited center. But that is the idea that the Hindu Congress rejected, not actually the Muslim League. The Hindu Congress just rejected it outright. They just wanted to create a very, very powerful centralized Soviet Union kind system to homogenize India and make India a nation state, not a multinational federation. And this, and when they basically said a nation state, Karamchand Gandhi came up with a very, I would say, dangerous idea. He said India is, because you can't call India a nation because the ethnicity is not same. Like Hitler could make an argument of racial similarity. That argument you can't make in India because it's per face, it is so false. So Karamchand Gandhi made a new concept. He said we are a civilizational nation. That in itself is false because a Punjabi is not of the same civilization like a Tamilian. A Tamilian is not the same civilization like somebody from the Northeast. But he just gave an idea of a fake idea. We are a civilizational nation. And then, which civilization nation? Then, because in reality, no such one civilization existed in the subcontinent, you have to go back to mythology, which is Mahabharata. So then you go to mythology and pick this idea of Bharat. That's why they named the country even Bharat. And then in reality, what they are building is a Indian state. They are in a nation building project. They want to homogenize the value system across the subcontinent, as you pointed out, on the concept of the mythological concepts, and especially around Varnashram, which is the core of their scripture, which is the caste system. So as long as I think the people need to realize that India is not a nation. India is a prison of nations. Somebody used that word for me. Another guy used a very rhetorical statement, but a very accurate statement, that India is not the largest democracy in the world. It is the largest authoritarian regime in the world. And if we are going to let that regime survive, eventually it's going to come after the liberties, even in the West. And I see them, now, Aman, kind of actually trying to subvert even the Western society with all the deep influence they have gotten. They have this brainwashed diaspora here. And while you start, I want to just play this video, okay? And I want your reaction to it, okay? I have played this video in some of my other this thing. Not sure if you have seen this before, but here is the video. Let me see if I can quickly find it again. Where's that gone? Okay. Here is the vice president of Oracle. Okay. He is of Indian descent and he works but maybe I'll play the video later. Just change my mind. But there's this whole nationalistic diaspora within America who is holding Indian nationalistic diaspora who is holding American passport, but actually works and loves the Indian civilization and overtly, covertly works for them. Is that not causing a national security issue for the West? Is allowing this philosophy to kind of strengthen itself? uh, do you think it's not now going to even threaten whatever, an isolated island of prosperity and whatever relative prosperity we have created in the West? What's your take on that?
Yes, I mean, there is, like we said, there is a crossroads for the West in terms of its openness to authoritarian regimes doing their dirty work within their boundaries. But I think there's also a, deeper confluence at work, which is the right and the sort of fascist wings within Western society, which always, they're always citing Hindu scriptures and they're always citing inspiration from Hindutva. So there is a resonance there, right? And you see this in the right wing in Canada coming out now, where they're admiring how Hindutva has managed the minority Muslim populations, how there's European populists, right populists, that are admiring how Hindutva has used its religion and its cultural sort of boundaries to push out Muslims and to dehumanize them and others and ourselves. So there is that undercurrent of like a resonance with, with Hindutva. At the level of policy, I think this is a crucial moment, not just for U.S. and others, in terms of how what they allow in their within their confines, but especially for us, either this gets normalized like it did in the context of Saudi Arabia, and it gets standardized, and there's sort of a much more normalization of this type of violence, and it gets worse, and you can count on it that it will get worse if there aren't any concrete ramifications coming out of this, or there's a disruption of the flow of violence, right? Or there's a slowing down of the violence. So I think it's crucial for both, definitely the Sikh community, but also Western democracies themselves, like which direction they want to go, and what sort of precedent they set. What's the standard that they're setting? I think it's very crucial that we interject, with the facts, with the narratives, with the higher level sort of abstract analysis also, to frame things. Because I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing is that it keeps getting reduced to some sort of a political conflict that these brown people are having over there. That needs to be disrupted, because that is half of the problem.
That's
We need to
correct.
connect it.
Yeah.
We need to connect it with the problems here. If you don't have this confluence between, for example, Zionism and Brahmanism at the level of state policy, that is going on. These fights are connected. The Palestine, and the entire center left agenda of human rights, of humanist ideologies themselves, that there's a deep resonance there. And we need to make sure that Khalistan is up there, because we are actually putting up a fight that's deeper than a political challenge, right? It's a civilizational and a psychic fight, that's challenging the strongest racial regime the world has ever seen.
That's correct. And I want to kind of unpack the first thing that you hinted upon. I think that's very insightful. The resonance that this casteist Hindu uh, kind of varnashram ideology has with the xenophobic and racist element of whatever is left within the Western society today. It's not the mainstream element, but it is there. That underlying current is there, and you see frequently there is this. They have this kind of liking for the Hindu caste system and the idea, and it is very reminiscent of the way. And I'm showing on my people who are watching my live stream. I picked up this book. I have to yet to read this, but apparently Hitler was a big admirer. Many of the Nazis, I'm told, were a big admirer of the Hindu caste system and the way they have persecuted the Dalits and kept them, subjugated. And I'm told there was some famous general who also used to carry Hindu scripture all the time in his pocket, and he was secretly Hindu. And then there is apparently there's a book there. There's a German lady who took a pseudo Hindu name of Savitri Devi. There's a book out there on her called Hitler's Priestess. And apparently, it is said that she's the one who basically taught Varnashram back to Hitler and kind of inspired Hitler to do the type of acts against the Jews, taking from the Hindu mythological myths. So, not sure if you have delved into. I have not delved into that, so I want to be cautious in making these claims. But there is definitely airy similarity between their concepts, and there is this mutual admiration that I see between the Nazi philosophy and the Hindu caste system proponents or the Indian state proponents. What is driving that? Like, have you kind of done some research on your own in this side? Like, what is your take? Even if you've not kind of done research on this angle, but you might have.
Yes, no, it's actually a very contentious issue in the study of Hinduism, also, where you have characters like Himmler and Hitler Germany, who used to carry a very nice version of a leather-bound version of Gita with him at all times, and he would cite it in the verses given from Krishna to Arjuna is that you are okay. It's okay to do violence, because this is it's not you that's doing the violence, right? It's this very like mystical abstraction of it's not you killing the other person, your relatives and others and human beings. It's just these are projections of yourself onto Maya, and it's the other person is falling onto your knife. You're not the one stabbing. So there's this mystification of very brutal violence by way of abstraction and sort of transcendental thought. And there's a deep philosophical resonance between Advaita Vedanta, which is basically the interpretation of Gita that's coming from that, is coming from that philosophy, which basically abstracts away the bodily, the physical, the value of the human lived experience in for the reason of, or for the it abstracts all of this away to favor the transcendental, that which is not acting, the self which is beyond your actions, that self which is just observing. So there's this philosophical move that happens that allows you to do all types of unspeakable violence on this earth, because these actions are illusions in themselves. This is just Maya. So that is very handy for fascist regimes. That is extremely helpful in motivating your troops. There are records of Nazi soldiers being, because nobody wants to do that type of violence, right? No matter how trained you are, they have to be desensitized to the realness, the flesh of the other, and they were done. That was accomplished through the Gita and through those very specific passages. But there is a larger project, a geopolitical project, which is coming out now around the coordinated alliance of of Brahmanical sort of supremacy, Hindutva, BJP, and the Zionist regime, right? So there is very solid work that's coming out that shows exactly how these two countries are sort of mirroring each other. The West Bank strategy is being applied in Punjab and Kashmir.
Yeah.
If they're displacing, replacing, dispossessing people at a much faster scale than Israel, because there is so much scrutiny on what happens on the ground in West Bank and other places, in Palestine. They aren't able to accomplish as much. But nobody knows what's going on in Kashmir. Nobody knows that Punjab is a proper settler colony that is giving subsidies to settlers. You're getting housing, you're getting voting rights within the week that you move there. You have other amenities and subsidies coming from the state government.
And the Sikh kids are forbidden from speaking their mother language in the schools. In Punjab schools today, private or public, you are punished if you talk in your mother tongue except Hindi. So
Right. I mean, there's right, but their settler colonial project is in full swing, and there's anybody that speaks up, and we have prime examples of this. That are right in front of us. Either you are imprisoned, like Amritpal Singh, or you're eliminated, like Deep Sidhu and Sidhu Moosewala. I mean, their crimes are that Sidhu Moosewala had one song, two songs, and one interview. That was transgressive.
yeah, so I just want to let the audience know. Let's go and talk about Sidhu Moosewala and Amritpal, but I want to set the context for the listeners because many of our listeners might be Western, like our fellow white folks. They might not know. So Sidhu Moosewala was a Punjabi singer, came to Canada, and he became such a rage not only within Punjabi audience but across like people, across cultures, across boundaries, and because his music was so good. I'm not much into the music scene, so somebody might quote the type of artists who were trying to kind of do songs with him. He went back to Punjab, and apparently he made a couple of songs which kind of focused on Sikh history and Sikh concept of self-respect. The Indian state just didn't like this idea, and they kind of murdered him in broad daylight. Everybody in Punjab knows that it was a hit on by ordered by the Indian government, and he's not one. There was another upcoming Sikh youth leader called Deep Sidhu, who dared to talk about questions like not even propose. He just opened the discussion on Sikh sovereignty issues again. Even after being so prominent, he was again. Indian government claims it was an accident, but we all know that he was murdered by the Indian state. Then we had another Sikh youth, Amritpal, who went from Dubai back to Punjab got baptized at a Sikh, started working with the village youth for de-addiction, and he was picked up and put in bars like thousands of miles away from Punjab. And then he fought an election sitting in the prison, and he won with record margins in his constituency without even being on a single day on in Punjab. So, but even after he became a member of parliament, he's basically rotting in the jail. The Indian states is keeping him under jail. They have not told him the charges against him. He's just kept there. India has laws, just for the context, people don't know. India has a law called Juapa, which is invariably always invoked against Sikhs, never against Hindus. If there's any data, you will see Indian government doesn't publish data, but 99% of the time it is against the Sikhs. And the law basically says that the state can put you behind bars for 2 years without telling you what your offense is, and it could be for any reason under the sun. The official anything like good moral or society. It's a very vague term. And then if they after 2 years they have to take you to a judge and tell you this is your crime, but then the onus of proving that you are presumed guilty until you prove your innocence. So the burden of proof is on the accused to prove that he's innocent in front of the judge rather than on the state to prove that this guy is guilty. This kind of reversal of burden of proof doesn't happen. So that is the law under which Amritpal is in jail, and he can be kept in jail throughout his life. Okay, for no fault of his, because those are the kind of laws that exist there. So that is how he is in jail. But that hasn't like this. But that is nothing, honestly, to what I had seen happening when I was a kid, in terms of youth getting like 13-year-old boys getting picked up and shot, tortured, shot. It's for just for police medals and just to have another militant killed in their name. So all this is happening, Amandeep. Like, but why is this? Why do you think that this is not being talked about? Like, all we talk about is listen about here is, oh, how Trudeau has started this diplomatic fight, why what our trade relations with India is going back. But man, like, these the real issue of the Indian regime's true nature and what it is doing to people out there. That is never the headline. Why do you think that is so?
I think the Indian branding of itself, of yoga and chai tea lattes and this mystical Gandhian stereotype is really powerful, and they've done a lot of work on this. And at the same time, they're so violent and they're so spectacular with the violence that they're so inefficient and sloppy that they get caught. But because the narrative is so strong, their mistakes get pushed under the rug, shoved under the rug as sort of minor transgressions of protocol, right? Instead of seeing them for what it is, which is a police fascist state acting out its agenda of eliminating any dissent anywhere in the world. So it's not only that they are uncomfortable, with any sort of resistance within its borders. They do not want to have a Sikh political subject exist anywhere in the world. So this needs to be highlighted, and it needs to be exposed that the world has not yet properly taken into account just how what a monstrosity grammatical power structure is. And that can only be done if you have, a canon of literature that explains its various aspects. So, for example, the history of Buddhists and Jains in India, we just know they used to be here and then they were kicked out. I mean, that's even as Sikhs, there's not very detailed narratives that exist. But there is a lot of material in texts and in sort of hidden in these, specialized studies that needs to be brought out. For example, there are, they weren't just expelled, they were tortured and killed en masse and made a spectacle of. And then that torture and murder was celebrated for centuries and is still celebrated. If you look at the temples in Madurai in Tamil Nadu, these temples have murtis, they have statues of the violence against Jains. When there was an incident where there was a so-called debate where Brahmin defeated the Jain scholar, and as a result, they were impaled en masse. Something like 8,000 Jains were impaled anally, going out of their, the instrument going out of their mouths. And there are statues of this violence on the temple walls. And up until 1974, up until this last century, 1974, there used to be a communal event, basically a mela, where the Hindu population, the upper caste, would go around holding sticks and puppets, the sticks going into the puppets and going around town, sort of singing hymns and celebrating the impaling, the mass impaling of Jains.
The Gudi Padwa, huh? That's the yeah. I didn't knew what this festival was about until like actually learned it on a Twitter space. This was about the Jain genocide. Amazing.
Right, and there are similar depictions on, so even if you think of this as not as a historian, you can cast doubt on the actual validity of the facts, which is fine. But for a group of people to think that this is something to put and to picturize, to depict on their most sacred spaces, on their temples, where even the Dalit walking by can look at it at least. If he can't hear the sacred scriptures, he can at least look at the images and know, that this is sacred. To have those impaling, Jains dressed like essentially, they look like they're tribals or blacks, the way they're depicted in the murals. And they're called chandals, and they're called other names that refer to their skin color being dark. So this is the form of violence that has been practiced in India for centuries. This is not a problem of political incorrectness or problems with international protocols not being followed. This is a much deeper civilizational problem, and it's the foundation of the entire society's self-understanding, and it has to be called out. Like, it's time to put them, to put the scrutiny, the international scrutiny on this way of thinking and the way of practicing. And there's ample examples. I mean, the work has to be done. Unless this gets out in a easily digestible form, in quick snippets and direct presentations, it's going to remain like covered up. And nobody's making these connections, right? Nobody's saying, look at the 160 million untouchables still living under, subhuman conditions in India, and connect that to the Brahmin power structure. Or nobody's saying, look at the most spectacular violence the world has seen in the 1980s. I would argue that it was Punjab, where 30,000 people are killed within a span of 3-4 days, and nobody bats an eye. Or where, you kill 10,000 people in their most sacred spaces over a course of a couple of days in June '84, and there's no real response. And there's, so the scale and the magnitude of violence that happened in Punjab is still to be exposed. And until that exposure is done regularly, frequently, and in a language that relates to sort of the leftist social justice, sort of international liberal order, we're not going to get the recognition. And I would, this is obviously not the only solution, but I think one would be to have discussions with journalists and to just bring out this story. Nobody, I think, is creating a case for Khalistan from this perspective, right? As a movement that rehabilitates human dignity, right? And also a movement that's fighting for a state that's a natural, organic political unit that actually existed here. It wasn't a colonial edifice, colonial structure that we won in a lottery because the British had to leave. We actually fought for it, and we built it organically. Actually had civil institutions that were the foundation of that state, right? Unlike India. So those two things, have to be called out. That India itself is an unnatural political entity, and this is how. And that the regime of violence behind it is unparalleled. Like, nobody else in the world has a more sophisticated and more brutal racial metaphysics. than
Yeah.
Brahmins.
That reminds me, I mean, like all the things you're talking about is kind of, this level of discourse has to happen. Maybe, it's on, in the true spirit of Sikhi, where we believe that it's on community and the individuals to take the responsibility. It's individuals like you, Sikhs like you, who have to take the responsibility and spread this truth and the real story about Indian regime. I'm actually now tempted. Not sure if you have read. I recently read a book um, by. I had read Karamchand Gandhi before, and I knew, what a scoundrel this guy is because he's talking about a resurrecting caste system. But I was not aware about his overall depth. I didn't study him in depth, and I didn't knew that he hated black people like anything. And I recently read a book. It got recommended by Colonel G.B. Singh. He's an ex-U.S. Army officer who wrote a book called Gandhi Behind the Mask of Divinity. And I just want to kind of quote some of the, Karamchand Gandhi's quotes, which are directly coming from collected works of Karamchand Gandhi. To just his quotes on race and black people and the lower caste. Let me just read them verbatim. Um, and in this course, he called the black people kafirs. Okay, it's a derogatory term, and he basically doesn't even call them human being. He calls them kafirs. This is September 24, 1903, Volume 3, Collected Works of Gandhi, page 256. Quote, we believe as much in the purity of race as we think they do. We believe also that the white race of South Africa should be the predominating race. December 24, 1903, quote, the petition dwells upon the commingling of the colored and white races. May we inform the members of the conference that so far as the British Indians are concerned, such a thing is practically unknown. Basically, the commingling of races, okay? If there is one thing which the Indian cherishes more than any other, it is the purity of the type. Unquote. Okay. February 15, 1904. Quote, under my suggestion, the town council must withdraw the Kafirs from the location. About this mixing of the Kafirs with the Indians, I must confess I feel most strongly. I think it is very unfair to the Indian population. This is volume 3, page 429. This is, when he petitioned that the black people shouldn't be allowed to live in the same area where the Indians are living because the Indians are the Aryans. Here is in September 1905. The decision to open the school for all colored children is unjust to the Indian community and is a departure from the assurance given that the schools will be reserved for Indian children only. He actually worked actively against, having black children study in the same school where the Indians will study. Here is another quote, 1908. The British rulers take us to be so lowly and ignorant that they assume that, like kafirs, we can be pleased with toys and pins. And here is 1908. Kafirs are, as a rule, uncivilized. And then he was totally against any, intermarriage between the black people and Indians. And here is the 1910 quote. Some Indians do have contacts with Kafir women. I think such contacts are fraught with grave dangers. Indians would do well to avoid Kafirs altogether. It's just, it's just amazing, and this is just some of it. Like some of the quotes are like so full of hate, and I just took a couple of them here. But I would love to have, Aman, like have a space where maybe we can have. Not sure if you'll be open, when we can discuss offline. If you'll be open to discuss, this element of a more in-depth understanding of the Indian civilization. No, no, let me take back my word. The Indian Hindu states undercurrents, the caste system there, and the society and the state. Maybe with you and Colonel GB Singh, will you be open to having another space on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think for the immediate time being, I'm interested in doing maybe shorter spaces that host a reporter or two,
Okay.
or any of the CSIS folks, that are speaking up now. I think having a little bit more formal conversation would be good. and have it recorded and circulated, or make media out of it.
Sure.
I think we need to start sort of networking and doing outreach. But yeah, that's a good project. I think in the long run, these stories have to come out. And there's so much there, right? If you just start looking and you change the framing of the problem, then we can actually make a dent.
Yeah.
Right? If the framing is this is just a political problem of some very similar brown folks over there, right? Then everything is reduced already. So just bringing that back to the center is very important. I think we should bring some. We should try to engage journalists, human rights orgs, people in sort of the Western Canadian American civil society, and we have some things in the works already. So, I will definitely try to reach out and bring folks out. I didn't mean to do a bunch of monologues. I think it just happened when we get going.
No, this is first space, so it's good actually to. And we loved it. I think everybody loved your monologues. I think they were very insightful. I would love to take. I think to keep the space short today. It's a bit late. I know your time. Maybe we can take one or two questions if you have time, and then we can close the space.
Sure, Anji.
Okay. I would love to take one or two. Maybe we'll go to three questions, depending on how much time it takes. So if anybody wants to come up and ask a question to Amandeep, this is the time. Please ask for the speaker, and I will give you guys the speaker, and you can come up and ask any question you want to ask. Or even if you want to make a statement, that's fine. And while we wait for that, yeah, you have given me a lot of pointers that I might have to now research myself. Some ways of thinking which I have not. We will do definitely, as you pointed out. We'll reach out to Dan, the CCS manager. I think he'll be open to doing a space. Peter Frederick has done good job on it. We'll probably do a space jointly with you and him. Have you guys kind of debate a couple of things. Then you probably know certain journalists. We can work on that offline. And okay, we didn't have anybody asking for the speaker, so I'll let you kind of close out, Aman. Any parting words, and then we'll close the space for today.
No, Haji, I think I've spoken enough. I think we are more or less on the same page. I mean, if there's opposite views, I would love to hear that too, because most productive conversations happen when there's disagreements. But I think there is a dire need for us to reframe what is being talked about, and there's certain moments when you have leverage, when you have the moral high ground, where the ethical burden is on the other party. And we need to be opportunistic and use this time to go hard, against the other side, and really put the moral burden on the Western, both on the Indian so-called left and the intelligentsia, but also definitely on the American and the Canadian political elite, right? That it's on them to decide the trajectory of what happens to six. There has to be that moral argument and rhetoric that we build into our presentations, because without it, there's this very timid, sort of apologetic approach towards things that would be impossible to say to others. Nobody can say to a Palestinian, like, we heard that people call you Palestinian and that you're a Palestinian activist. Is this true? How is this possible that this is the standard question that every damn journalist thinks is common sense to ask? So that's there because we don't have, virile, unapologetic, proactive, bold narrative, right? Like, we need to build that into every single conversation and make that the norm, and shift the center from defensive, apologetic justifications of existing as political, subjects, to placing the burden where it deserves to be, on the rogue states, right, on the police regimes, and on their corporate allies. I mean, this needs to be called out, and we should, in fact, not be happy with just the mention of. I mean, if you look at the true nature of the event, it's pretty absurd that they went to this extent.
Yeah.
To call out, to challenge the sovereignty of these nations. It's very bold what they did. They basically ran a mafia-style control center from their embassies to do arson, extortions, shooting up artists' homes, extorting money from sick businessmen, and doing sort of spectacular violence, going on to religious spaces and shooting up the president in the parking lot. Like, this is very, it's very exceptional, even for international violence. And so we just need to call out that nature of it again and again and again, and call out the Sikhs are not separatists. They're the ones rehabilitating or decolonizing their own state from this artificial entity called India. It doesn't have any precedent. It doesn't have any history. It doesn't have any organic institutions that are the foundations of a nation state. It's a colonial construct, and it needs to be treated as such. No matter your.
I just want to lay it out lastly to anybody, like, who, if people call us separatists, we are not separatists. We are just freeing our land up from occupation. We have been occupied. We are being killed day in and day out. And we just want a simple thing, the right, the basic human right to run our own society, write our own laws, have our own police system, have our own judiciary. We have no problem with anybody, like how Bengalis live, Tamilians live, Nagalandis live, the Indians live. They can live the way they want. They have full right, but they have no right to occupy our land, to loot our resources, to kind of take away our water, to kind of conduct genocide of our youth. So we are fighting for the right. We are the good guys here, and I think the world needs to wake up, Aman. And I think it will wake up because there has been no the Sikh story, the Sikh side of the story. Our story was never told to the world. It's all this Indian media and disinformation and malinformation being spread about by this fascist state with immense resources. But all that, propaganda will melt in front of truth. And that's the what, I think we need to do more often and with more rigor. And with that, I'm going to probably just I think with that note, maybe we can end this space. Sorry, I kind of cut you through, but the idea is to close it now, and we'll exchange messages and we'll schedule the next space. And yeah.
Hanji, thanks so much for hosting this and for everyone for being so patient. I did want to request that anybody that's interested in writing or reaching out, networking, and doing this sort of narrative work, you can reach out to either of us. And we have, some humble projects going on, and we would love to get help of those that are, invested in this.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।